Welcome to the launch for the new book, Families, Mobility and Work, published by Memorial University Press. My name is Barbara Neis, and I'm one of the editors for this new collection and one of your hosts for this evening's conversations with some of the contributors. Before we start the conversations, which will be moderated by co-editor Nora Spinks, I want to take a few minutes to acknowledge the funder for the research and preparation of this collection, which is available in hard copy and as an open access downloadable PDF on the website for Memorial University Press. I also want to say a few words about the collection and about how we think it contributes to our understanding of how diverse forms of work-related mobility affect families in the Canadian context. Families, Mobility and Work draws on insights from two programs of research: the On the Move Partnership, a Canada-wide project based at Memorial University, and Tale of Two Islands, an Atlantic Canadian study based at the University of Prince Edward Island and Cape Breton University. I'm the director of On the Move. Christina Murray, co-editor, and her colleague Doug Lionais were the lead researchers on Tale of Two Islands. Both are members of tonight's conversation panel. Both projects studied mobility for work, with Tale of Two Islands studying the effects of travel to Alberta on families in Prince Edward Island and Cape Breton, and On the Move looking at diverse types of mobility to and within work across multiple provinces, contexts, and sectors. Both research programs were funded by the Social Science and Humanities Research Council. On the Move also received funding from the Canada Foundation for Innovation and from Innovate NL in the Newfoundland and Labrador government, and from several universities. The Vanier Institute for the Family has been an active partner with the On the Move partnership since its inception in 2012, in part through the engagement of Nora Spinks, co-editor, and when she was the Vanier CEO. The Institute helped bring together Tale of Two Islands and On the Move by supporting and participating in a joint symposium we hosted at the University of Prince Edward Island in 2018, also funded by SSHRC, and contributing attention to military families to our work and eventual book. The Vanier has also provided extensive support around promotion of families' mobility and work. Finally, publication of the book was helped by a grant from the Federation of Humanities and Social Sciences through the Awards to Scholarly Publications program. In addition to thanking our funders, I would also like to thank Fiona Pollack, Alison Carr and Randy Drover at Memorial University Press, Nathan Badams at the Vanier Institute for the Family, and Leslie Butler and Janet Oliver at On the Move. So very briefly, what is this collection about? And how does it contribute to our understanding of families, mobility, and work in Canada? Here I draw on material from the introduction and the conclusion. Extended, complex work-related mobility can range from transnational mobility through internal, interjurisdictional, regional, and other mobilities, and it can operate at varying temporal scales from daily through annually. It's widespread and increasing within Canada, as well as globally. Indeed, using the On the Move definition of extended complex mobility for work, we estimate that Canada's mobile labor force comprised roughly 16% of the total labor force in 2016. There are literatures on work-related mobility and family lives encompassing international migration and transnational families, on daily commuting, on extended commuting, including rotational work, on mobility and deployment within the military, and on work and transportation and other mobile and transient workplaces. Until recently, these literatures have been largely separate, but some researchers are now bridging them. These researchers observe that mobility is an inherent part of the lives of most families, including mobilities for school, recreation, shopping, work, and care of extended family and friends. They remind us that these mobilities change over the life course, and that some international migrations entail relatively short distances and daily commutes, as with cross-border mobility between, say, Windsor and Detroit. This suggests that the separation of international from internal mobility may be somewhat artificial. Similarly, the challenges and burdens for workers and their families of extended daily commutes to low-paid and precarious employment may exceed those associated with well-paid rotational work and business travel. Recent work also pushes back against the tendency to pathologize families with members engaged in mobility for work, highlighting both potential benefits of mobility and the agency of family members seeking to grapple with the strains associated with recurrent and sometimes prolonged separations for parents, children, and others. Families' mobility and work contributes to this growing body of integrative literature that brings together different types of mobility. Work-related mobilities explored in the collection range from the spatially constrained but complex daily mobilities for work accomplished by Mandy Penney, who you will meet tonight, through to international migration into Canada, entailing the formation of transnational families. And we'll learn something about this international mobility tonight from Shiva Nourpanah. The collection comprises contributions ranging from personal stories, songs, poetry, and photo essays through more traditional academic articles. Kevin Ryan, a former interprovincial migrant worker turned nurse, for example, will sing a song tonight reflecting on his experiences. Most contributions adopt a storytelling approach and include photos and images in order to encourage engagement by diverse audiences and to combine experiential with analytical comparative insights. Digital stories and photo essays are powerful tools for presenting the stories and experiences of families dealing with mobility for work. Excellent examples of the use of these visual tools and methods can be found in the photo essay in the collection by Andrew Lincoln and George Gamelch called The Working Lives of Beta Verde. This essay is one piece of a much larger project involving digital stories and a feature-length documentary film on the same themes. Another excellent example of the use of photos, and in this case artistic creation, is the piece by the late Brenda Grzetic. In Ruminations on Ephemerality, Brenda used findings from ethnographic field research, photographs, and collage to help us access the experiences of relatively poor West Coast Newfoundlanders who move seasonally for work in other provinces in seafood processing, agriculture, and forestry. These workers often migrate as couples and sometimes as families with young children, and frequently travel and live and work together while away. This powerful contribution examines their annual struggle to get to places with work opportunities, to find and pay for a place to live, and if necessary, place children in school in another province, while also getting enough hours of work to cover their costs and qualify for employment insurance when they return home for the off-season. She describes the feelings of emptiness in the communities they leave behind, the criticisms of women who migrate for work leaving their children behind, the antagonism and other challenges they have to confront in their destination workplaces and communities, the ephemerality that is part of living in two places, and the sense of relief and the need for healing they experience on their return home. Contributions also encompass mobility within work, as with Stephen High's account of the historical work of Black train porters in Montreal, which we'll learn more about tonight, and Alexia Stasha-Newson's story about her experiences as a Coast Guard seafaring employee. Some contributions explore the mobility-related opportunities and challenges in the lives of male, and less commonly female, interprovincial rotational workers and their families. Christina Murray, Doug Lionais, and Sara Dorow will speak to these tonight. Many of the contributions include attention to the agency of workers and nuclear and extended family members in the accomplishment of their own lives in the context of complex mobility for work. Other examples of agency include ways the support of grandparents can play a critical role in helping offset the strains associated with the absence of one or more parents for work. Engagement by grandparents can create opportunities for the latter to develop closer relationships with their children and grandchildren, but also social and financial challenges resulting in feelings of ambivalence. Christina Murray and Don Avery from Prince Edward Island have been striving to identify and address these challenges and can speak to them tonight. Some contributions to families' mobility and work explore the family-making activities engaged in by and with other workers and households that help support and give meaning to mobility. These family-making activities include the critical support provided to Mandy Penney by friends she thinks of as family. They also include the family-making activities of the lighthouse keeper, Sharon Roseman, we'll talk about tonight, and the contributions to the social reproduction of Belle Island households provided by community workers. These are described in Diane Royale's contribution to the collection. In addition, they include the processes and benefits associated with participating in motorcycle clubs for military veterans adjusting to retirement. These are explored in Karen Samuel's contribution to the book. The notion of home as distinct from work resonates throughout the collection in reflections on leaving and returning home, a desire for and missing home. As time away on the road, at work, and often living at work grows, it cuts into time at home, influences the dynamics of reentry and leaving again, and the opportunities to be part of key events and transitions in family lives. This theme is dealt with in multiple contributions. Other themes that cut across the collection and associated research relate to how families impacted by work-related mobility, including military deployment and relocation, frequently deal with uncertainty, change, and in some cases, significant disruptions to their daily lives as they struggle to achieve what we call fragile synchronicities between family, mobility, work, education, and other rhythms. The collection reminds us that the benefits, costs, and challenges associated with work-related mobility are unevenly distributed between employers, workers, and family members, and that their scale and effects are mediated by state policies, including, for example, family supports, such as access to and the cost of childcare, economic development, transportation, and housing. The valued contributions of many have created this rich, open access collection of stories, images, and research articles that we hope will allow our readers to explore many of the effects of diverse forms of work-related mobility through a family-centered lens. The collection reminds us that while families may be the most adaptable institutions in our society, we require evidence-based, evidence-informed, and evidence-inspired workplace practices, community and social supports, public policies and programs, if families are to thrive as they strive to harmonize and synchronize their work, family, and mobility rhythms with their broader needs. The conclusion to the collection includes policy recommendations that, taken together, could help reduce the challenges and maximize the benefits of extended mobility for work for families. It also argues that more research and action are needed to understand the intersections of work mobility and families and all of their diversity, and to design and implement appropriate supports for these workers and their families in Canada and globally. For families impacted by work-related mobility, we hope this collection offers a glimpse into your lives, your sources of strength and resilience, the challenges you share with others, and what might help mitigate those challenges in the future. For those who serve and support these workers and their families, we hope the collection will be a useful resource in your work and help you access the resources and supports you need to do this work effectively. Over to you, Nora.
Thank you so much, Barb. It is my pleasure and honor to facilitate this panel this evening. Thank you, Barb, for setting the stage and giving us the overview of the book. As she so aptly described, this is a topic that is complex, that has breadth and depth, that we could spend days talking about. Unfortunately, we only have about an hour and a half together total. So all you're going to get is a little sample. As Barb mentioned, you can download the book, you can order it if you prefer the paper version, but it is something that we're very proud of, and we want to thank all of the contributors, not just those who are able to join us this evening. So we're going to do 3 rounds of questions with our 8 panelists. That's a big ask for all of them, because each and every one of them could give us an hour and a half at least of the work that they've done on this book. So we're going to do 3 quick rounds. We're going to have an intermission with a little musical interlude about halfway through. You're going to hear some of the non-papers that are contributing to the work in this space of families, mobility, and work. Now, the book is broken up into 7 parts, 30 chapters, and as you can imagine, there are multiple contributors. The first one we're going to hear from, actually, we're going to hear from 2 from part 1 of the book, Diversity, Mobility, Work, and Families. We're going to begin with Stephen. Welcome, Stephen. Stephen's going to talk to us about his chapter. The title is Climbing the, quote, Ladders of Success, Family, Labor Mobility, and Anti-Black Racism in 20th Century Montreal. Stephen, if you were to give us a sense of your chapter, what's the one thing you would like readers to take away from your chapter?
Thanks so much, Nora. And I just want to say that how proud I am to be part of this collection. It's a fantastic volume, and I've been reading it over the last few weeks, and it's just great. So as you mentioned, my chapter looks at the central place of labor mobility in the foundation of Montreal's Black community in the first half of the 20th century. So employment-related mobility is nothing new. So this would be my big point. Nor is it random. Due to structural racism, Black men found few jobs in the city's factories, and the one job open to them was working as a railway porter or cook. It was therefore no coincidence that Little Burgundy, which was located right next to the 2 railway stations, became Montreal's first multiracial neighborhood. For porters, working on passenger trains meant being away from their families for long periods of time. A porter on the Montreal to Vancouver run, for example, was gone for 14 days at a time. This put enormous pressure on their families. To support themselves, these women formed strong community associations, starting with the Colored Women's Club in 1902, Union United Church, the Negro Community Center, and the Women's Auxiliaries for the Union all provide essential support to Black families. Railway porters fought hard to improve their situation by forming a union and then fighting for a better deal. They therefore shared in the unionized prosperity after the war, and most moved to the suburbs like their white neighbors, and many of their children were able to go to university and become professionals. However, the decline of railway travel in the 60s and 70s meant disaster, as hundreds of porters were laid off. As historic racism structured collective agreements, they could not move to other jobs in the railway. So who is mobile and why? This is my fundamental question. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Next up, also in the chapter or the part of Diversity, Mobility, Work, and Families is Chapter 4. Mandy Penney, with her colleague Dana Howes, wrote the chapter, When You Got a Disability, You Get Good at Networking, an interview about work mobility with a disability and the evolving, quote, family that it supports. Mandy, welcome.
Thank you. So after readers read mine and Dana's chapter, I'd like them to be more aware of the work that people with disabilities have to engage in just to work, including traveling to, around, for, and from work. For instance, I must book our prayer transit system, known as GoBus, days in advance to go to and around for work. And I have to book it to be picked up at least an hour early for meetings or events, if not earlier, depending on how busy it is. And often I could be late for a meeting or extremely early, which I do not know which is worse, because sometimes there is nowhere for you to wait if you're early to a meeting or the building is closed and you have to wait outside in Newfoundland winter. Alternatively, I estimate that for every 1 hour, 30-minute meeting, I have to spend 2 hours waiting and going to the meeting and waiting and leaving the meeting, which can make it very difficult if you have multiple meetings in a row. And when I'm in a meeting, I cannot fully concentrate because I'm worried, is the go bus going to be early, late, and how long am I going to be on the go bus? Because it can be hours that you're on the go bus, depending on how busy it is, and when I'll get dropped off. So I'd just like people to be aware of the work it is just to work.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mandy. Next up in part 2 of rotational work and evolving families, we have Kevin Ryan, who's going to tell us one thing he would like you to take away from his chapter entitled Coming Home. Kevin?
I guess my takeaway from my chapter Coming Home is about the magical fluidity of life itself. And, it's been sort of how I've lived my life, which is kind of trying to be flexible enough to follow the signs that appear. And if you can do that, you get to where you need to be. And so I started traveling out west, as we say, out west, to work as a means to an end, to clear up some short-term debt and work on a couple of projects. But it served me well in that it served that purpose, and it also was a life experience to me. I grew to like some aspects of working seismic lines and putting out gear, and graduating to be a bus driver, and eventually in human resources, where I would recruit people to do that kind of thing. But the traveling really worked for me until it didn't anymore. So, and that was quite a long period when it did work for me. But then I guess the main thing is when circumstances change, you have to be able to make a new plan, or else you're going to succumb to resentment and happiness. And, you're going to bring that to work, and you're going to bring that home. So you're not going to be able to escape it wherever you go. For me, it was when our kids came along that my traveling chapter was over, at least for a couple of decades, and we're moving into adolescence here, so maybe we can explore that in a few more years. But really, it was time for me to make a new plan, and I was fortunate to be able to switch to a very interesting career as a nurse, and that in itself has been its own journey, and I've done a few interesting things in that realm. So, traveling for work and traveling back home, and the transition has given me a lot of stories for my, personal life story. And I was happy to be able to roll a few of those into a chapter and share, and hopefully other people can relate to some of the roads that I went down.
Thank you, Kevin. Also in part 2, rotational work and evolving families, Sara Dorow.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nora. Let me echo other people's enthusiasm in being part of this book. I'm actually going to speak to the other chapter that I'm a part of, which is called something like a juggling act, and it's about mothers who participate in fly in, fly out, or FIFO. I wrote that with 2 other people. And I think all of the authors on this chapter would agree that one of the sort of bigger takeaways in general is that foregrounding mobility as a fact of work really helps to illustrate and illuminate the gender dynamics, the unequal gender dynamics, right, of family work relations that many people encounter. And our work mostly came out of the oil sands in northern Alberta, where most of our material was gathered. And there are, of course, many fly in, fly out workers that work in that industry. And that distance and time can be challenging for all parents, especially when their children are young. But for mothers who participate in flying in, flying out, where they're going on rotations back and forth and staying in work camps for anywhere from a week to sometimes a couple of months, there are additional challenges. And one of these is that the heavily masculine and sometimes remote environments where they work aren't necessarily prepared for and can sometimes be hostile to mothers who rotate long distances. So one key issue that we ran into and found several instances of were mothers who were kind of stuck between taking a quite demanding mobile job on the one hand, or not having any job at all. So for example, Julie, one of our participants, when she was pregnant, had to choose between a really taxing travel rotation and keeping her job. And Mandy, a single mother supporting 2 kids, found herself stuck in a rotation of 12 days on, 2 days off for almost 3 years in a row. Which broke her health and almost broke her relationship with her children. And she felt at some point that she simply had to walk away, that she had no choice but to walk away from the job. And in some of these cases, another added layer that's really important is that FIFOing, flying in, flying out, or driving out as a mother, is often only possible because of the chains of gendered care that go beyond the individual women and often involve their own mothers who are providing childcare and a place to land, a stable place to land when there is no work or times get tough. So this then becomes an issue of intergenerational mothering while FIFO.
Thank you, Sarah. Very interesting. We're moving on to part 3. We're going to be talking about mobility and multi-generational family and community relationships. And I'd like to invite Christina Murray and Doug Lionais to talk about chapter 12. Above everything else, I just want to be a great grandparent. Examining the experiences of grandparents supporting families impacted by mobile labor in Atlantic Canada. Doug, do you want to start us off and tell us what one thing you would like readers to take home from your chapter?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Nora. Thanks for having me part of this, and I'm really excited to be part of the panel and the book. And a special thanks to Christina, who will jump in and add her own 2 cents, I'm sure. So our chapter really is nice. It just follows on. You guys must have planned this. It picks up really well off of Kevin's comments and Sarah's comments. Because our chapter, we look at the impacts of grandparents when their children are engaging in mobile work, particularly to the Alberta oil sands, and they need to take up those increased care responsibilities for their grandchildren while their children are rotating out west. And we included grandparents in our research. We wanted to have that intergenerational component to it. To a large extent because of comments like Kevin's, that previous research that both Christina and I had been doing had suggested that mobile work, people going out west to work, it kind of works, and some people actually quite enjoy it, but it becomes very, very hard to do when there's a family, when there's young children not living at home involved. So we really wanted to explore more of what's going on within those families. And again, picking up on the role of grandparents, because they were certainly seen as being a key component of the childcare when people are rotating. And so when we did get out and do the research, and we did a number of interviews with members from intergenerational families from both Cape Breton and PEI, we did find that grandparents did play a very important role, but that role is often overlooked, even though it's a really important role in how families cope with mobile work. And I guess the one thing I'd really like people to take away from this particular chapter, but a lot of the work that we did on the Tale of Two Islands project, and as well as some of the On the Move stuff, is that these forms of mobile work often externalize the costs of this form of labor arrangement. And those costs are often borne in the first instance by the families of mobile workers. And so those families that are involved, it can have very profound impacts in terms of restructuring the family and restructuring people's roles inside their family. And it really can change those roles in meaningful ways. And in the case of our chapter, what we see this in the way in which grandparents have seen their retirement and near retirement lives transformed by the need to care for children. So their ideals and their ideas of aging into an era of self-care and being cared for is surpassed by this need to continually care for others, care for the younger generations within their own family.
Thanks, Doug. That's wonderful. Great summary. You know, every one of these panelists could continue to give us more and more information about their chapters, but we have 3 more to go in this round. Next up, I'd like to invite Sharon Roseman, who's going to talk about her chapter 18 in part 4. This part looks at marine and coastal work, mobility, and family making. And Sharon's going to tell us what one thing she would like readers to take away from her chapter entitled Light Keeping and Family Making. Sharon?
Thank you, Nora. Thanks as well to all the editors and to everyone at the press. It's great to have a chapter in the book. The one thing I would like readers to take away from this chapter is an added appreciation of what goes on behind the scenes, so to speak, in any work scenario, and particularly in terms of the family making that is an integral part of many people's jobs. As we learned from the chapter, light keepers, and especially those who do shifts at some distance from their non-work families, focus on finding ways to maintain connections with their family members back home at the same time as they build daily lives with coworkers they may be stationed with or connected to remotely. Work family lives that provide the necessary socialization of new members and ongoing support of various types. It's possible that these aspects of work relationships have been pushed to the background in many people's minds in light of the emphasis during the COVID pandemic on remote work arrangements that in some cases are here to stay. But as researchers, we can also study how family making and family maintenance take place as part of work via remote connections, just as we do when looking at how workers with remote assignments or long distance commuting rhythms keep up with both family back home and work colleagues situated elsewhere. Ethnographers are interested in what people do to make a living, but also in the everyday how of work, how it gets done, how it is sustained, and by whom and with whom, including in the face of various difficulties. These can include contradictions, troubling forms of marginalization, conflicts, and other difficulties. We study all these aspects of work lives, including the resilience that workers draw from each other in making families through work.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Next up, out of part 5, which is the section on international migration, work and families, we have Shiva Nourpanah, who's going to be talking about her chapter number 23, Family, First of All is Family, Refugee Movements in Eastern Canada. Shiva, welcome. What would you like people to take away from your chapter?
Good evening, everyone, from a bitterly cold Nova Scotia. Thank you so much for extending the invite to me and my co-author, Pauline Gardner Barber. I think the key takeaway from our chapter, which is regarding refugee movements after they arrive in Canada, it really does build up on the literature, which talks about the messiness and the blurriness of refugee motivations and refugee movements, which is, and I think one of the most interesting things which really struck me was there is a very governmental image, of refugees, which the whole refugee process is kind of driven by that, by that framing. The refugee flees from their country of origin based on fear of persecution, arrives in the country of refuge, stays wherever they are, stays at their first point of landing, no further movement. Any form of administrative support or government support or NGO support is geared towards the refugee staying in the place they arrived. And it's actually fascinating to hear about the disarray, the bureaucrats, whether we're talking about the NGO workers or the government workers, were thrown into the prospect of refugees moving onwards from their first point of entry, which in many cases was either Montreal or Toronto, and their desire to move on, they say, they do their research, they look up, they compare, they listen to people, they make phone calls, and then they decide to move on to another place. And the whole array of government-sponsored supports for them is really thrown, like the whole governmentality around refugee movement is geared towards them staying where they are, which is, it's really weird when you actually think about this notion that ties access to support and service. And there's actually nothing in the international refugee protection regime which ties assistance to refugees to them being in a certain point or staying in a certain location in their country of refuge. Like, there's no requirement for them to do that. Of course, different countries have different refugee regimes, which often do tie or do require that refugees stay in particular places. Canada is not actually one of them. So it's surprising to see this governmentality, which also exists in the shelter. Like, I should clarify, it wasn't just from government, but also from the non-government agencies, which were, of course, more nimble as they are compared to government. And, they were like trying to figure out how to adapt a legal certificate from Quebec to Halifax, how to adapt housing benefits from Toronto to Ontario to Nova Scotia. So they were like, it's, I think, really, that was kind of one of the most interesting things that struck me from our chapter. There were others for sure, but I would encourage you to read the chapter and find out what they were.
Thank you so much, Shiva. Appreciate that summary. That takes us to our brief intermission, and that takes us back to Kevin. Kevin, do you want to give us a little taste of some of your thoughts put to music?
Sure thing, Nora. So my chapter is sandwiched in between two songs, and one song talked about the yearning, the need to go away in the first place, and the second song, which is what I'm going to play for you right here, speaks to the feeling of coming home, and that's the name of this song. That's the name of my chapter, and I hope you enjoy it here. I'm burning down this road, feeling close to burning out, but the fire in my heart is still burning. Like a secret never told, yearning to come out. There's a lesson that I'm finally learning. It tells me where I really want to be. It's where I've really always been. And it's a penny for your thoughts and a quarter for the phone. Soon my call won't be long distance. I see so clearly what I've got. I wasn't meant to be alone. This road offers no resistance. From the weeks to days and hours now, the countdown, it's almost gone. And a candle shines in my window bright. I sleep in a bed with you tonight. The world that I can truly call my own lies in front of me, and I'm coming home. I don't regret the wanderlust. I call this road a friend and the people I've met along my way. But it's my instincts that I trust now that my journey's at an end. There's no question where I belong today. I trade the 4 strong winds and the 7 seas for the shelter of your arms. Oh, a candle shines in my window bright. I'll sleep in a bed with you tonight. The world that I can truly call my own lies in front of me, and I'm coming. Where the crossroads that I have now gone through, I know the place for me is my place with you. Soon we don't have to wait anymore. I got the pedal to the floor in a bed with you tonight. A world that I can truly call my own lies in front of me, and I'm coming, it's right in front of me. Oh, I'm coming, you're right in front of me. I'm coming home. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Really appreciate that, both in terms of the little interlude, but also showing that there are multiple ways to share our stories and experiences, including through song. So the next round of questioning, I want to ask each panelist, this work that you've all done in preparing your chapter, the work you've done in the past, I want to shift now to present. I'm going to ask you how your work on your chapter has impacted your life. You were intensely focused on the work that you just shared with us. And what have you been doing since the work that contributed to the chapter? More of the same or something different? Let's go back to Stephen. Stephen, what's your life been like since that work, and what are you working on now?
Well, it's a hard act to follow after that great music. Yeah, I guess perhaps like surprisingly, my chapter was a very personal one, as my father was a railway worker who belonged to the same union as these Black Porters, the Canadian Brotherhood of Railway Employees. And initially, like all of the other railway brotherhoods, it had a white-only clause. And so when the Black workers tried to organize, they were first told, no, you can't join. And so they formed their own union in 1917, the first sort of major Black union in North America. And then 2 years later, they joined my father's union. And this whole story was new to me. It was not a story that had been shared with me by my father. And by the time I started working on this project, he had dementia and he died over the course of it. So I had many, unanswered questions. And so in a way, my delving into this had a very much a personal, personal dimension to it. I also live next to Little Burgundy, and I walk through the neighborhood every day to go to the university. And so I've seen, I see every day, the impact of this history. And I think writing this piece has helped me understand, how a history of a neighborhood is profoundly shaped by geographic employment mobility. That it's helped me understand, why things are as they are. And I think that the shift from cars to trains had a 1-2 punch against sort of these Black families. At first, they lost their jobs on the railway, and secondly, they lost their homes because this neighborhood was targeted for demolition. And so it's had I think a profound impact in terms of how I understand my family, how I understand my community.
Thank you, Stephen. Mandy, how about you? How's this chapter impacted your life, and what are you working on now?
So working on this chapter with Dana has opened my eyes to the planning and preparation that I do to work. When she was asking me questions about my process to get to work, I was surprised by how interested she was in it, because I'd never given it much thought before. It was just something I had to do to get to work. And maybe because of COVID, I had more time, but as we had further discussions, I started to unpack it more. And I just realized how much I had to do just to work. So I used to feel really bad about not being as productive as I had wanted to be, because I just had spent so much time planning for the next day. But now I feel I forgave myself more for not being able to get everything done. So for example, if you spend 2 hours waiting to return from a meeting, you can't really do that follow-up action items, because now you just have to go home, or you'd have to stay up all night to catch up on work. I would work overtime. So I still feel a bit of guilt, but I'm getting better at forgiving myself for that. And I'm more intentional intentional about how I spend my time. So if I'm going to spend 2 hours to get to a 30-minute meeting, I will ask to have a virtual meeting unless I have to be there in person. And I'm lucky to have an employer who allows me to set a flexible schedule. So I really appreciate that. And since completing this chapter, I've engaged in more research. So I'm working with Barb and Safety Net and Inclusion and Now, my employer, to work on a project that looks to explore how people with disabilities can get into the oil and gas, mining, renewable energy, and natural resources industries. And I've also spoken more about my experience as an employee with a disability. So I spoke at Cenovus Energy's Diversity Forum in 2020 about my experience and the positives of COVID-19 on getting to and from work and how it's led to more flexibility. I've spoken as my experience as a graduate student with a disability and how flexible COVID has been to completing my master's, because most of it is online and things like that. So I'm just getting more involved into research.
Thank you so much. Kevin, how about you? How's life been for you? You mentioned you've now got teenagers and you're managing all of that. How's this chapter impacted your life, and what are you working on now?
Well, yeah, I could take one of those 1.5 hour sessions and talk about the adolescence, but when I think about how this book changed things and impacted things, I think, you know, the process of writing it was a reflective process. And when we entered nursing school, which was sort of where my chapter ends, is when I kind of finished nursing school and all the things that led me to enter it in the first place. But one thing that we're taught to do as nurses is to be reflective, you know, really go inward and think about what worked about a certain situation, what could we do better. So, you know, the process of writing a book was very reflective, which comes to me naturally. I suppose, you know, that leads to writing songs, or it makes it a good fit that way, as we say in human resources. But the reflection piece kind of carries me forward in terms of, well, okay, that's where we were. We passed our license exam. I became a nurse. I became a nurse. And then it was, all right, what are we doing now? So, you know, not just that the other traveling work led me to become a nurse, but it really influenced how I work as a nurse, because it allowed me to kind of take that into my practice and be flexible. And I have done a few things as a nurse, worked in a few different areas, and finally I got back to education. And the pandemic has seen me I just completed my coursework for my master's, and we'll write a thesis in the new year. And so back to the good old keyboard. You know, there's been a lot of papers between now and then, and we'll keep on working on the big one next. And we'll keep on thinking about, you know, the beautiful butterfly effect of what connects the dots and allows us to get from one thing to the next, and the relationships along the way that defines what life is.
Thank you, Kevin. And from one generation to the next, as we heard from Stephen, and from one colleague to the next, as we've heard from many of you. Sara, what have you been working on recently, and how has this impacted your life?
Yeah, thanks, Nora. And I always feel like a buzzkill following Kevin, but because the optimism is wonderful. I'm actually going to start with something that I wish that had changed but hasn't, which is that when we did this project, and this work that we did in this chapter came both from Kelly Griffin's MA thesis and from a project that I was heading up called Mental Health and Mobile Work in the Oil Sands. And we were all struck when we were doing this project on how little research there has been on the experiences of women in the trades, let alone on women in the trades who fly in, fly out, drive in, drive out. And so I wish that I had more time in my day to actually, you know, build some new research in this area. So for example, the survey that we did attracted, it was about 30% women who did the survey on their experiences of mental health as rotational workers. And that's 3 times the percentage of women that are in this workforce. And so I think that women, they want to be heard about their experiences. So that needs to happen. And then Kelly, the first author in this article, let me know that in her own work now in government, she thinks about this project all the time because of the high mobility of MPs, members of parliament, with whom she works, which has all these cascading gender effects. And so she sees it around her all the time. And for me, I now can't not think about gender mobility all the time. And so it's carried over into, for example, a new project that I'm doing that's gathering multimedia work life stories across 7 provinces and territories in Canada. It uses photography and soundscapes of work and then a sort of long form interviews to create this incredible diverse collection of work life experiences and how people give meaning to work. And so whether it's women who farm or who own a small business or teach music, I just can't not be aware of the way in which their family work relations are shaped, by both sort of gendered norms of care and gendered forms of mobility and immobility. So it's sort of just embedded itself in my life and work.
Thanks, Sarah. Doug, how about you? What are you working on these days? How has this project impacted your life?
Thanks, Nora. It's interesting when I was reading through the chapter again yesterday to prepare for this, and I was going through the references that were there. This work has been ongoing for me for about a decade now, and this book and some of the other outputs coming out in the next couple of months, next year or so, sort of bookending the end of this sort of bit of research that has taken up the last decade. And I remember that I first got interested in this because most of the work I do is really interested on the community level or regional level economic impacts or economic changes and these types of things. And I started this work because I really just needed a footnote, and because I knew at the time there's a lot of people going from Cape Breton to the Alberta oil sands to work, and I just wanted to know, well, what percentage of our economy is that right now? And I assumed someone had already done the work, and after looking, found out no one had. So that need for that little footnote on another article at some point has sent me down this path. And I've really enjoyed it. I've got to work with some wonderful people, including my co-authors here, Christina. But in terms of what I've personally taken out of this work is, in this work in particular with Christina, whereas most of my work focuses on that community level or at the regional level, this really focused us at the family level. And there are a lot of community level impacts that you don't see that are masked and hidden unless you really get into those smaller levels of scale. So I'm hoping that I will continue to take that on in my further work, looking at not just family but other areas of smaller scales as we continue to do work. And I think I'm going to throw to Christina because I think she wants to jump in on this one as well.
I do. Thanks, Doug. The work on this chapter really was very transformative for myself, being able to work with Doug. Who would have thought a human geographer and a registered nurse would come together and make such magic happen in this project? But it really helped me to think about research and how you can lead research in a different way that truly gets at the experience of people's lives. So we looked at our project and we interviewed the whole family, people who are traveling, the mothers, the wives who are left behind, and the grandparents. And so many of the people that we talked to at that family level said, no one's talked to us about this before. And we knew we were on to something in terms of the project. And it really helped me to think about family as the unit and how to be family-centered as a researcher, and what it means to truly engage with your people and with your research team, and how when you bring different people together, different sectors, you can really make some strong impacts. And from this project, we splintered off a bit. We looked at, the men, the women, and the grandparents. And that really opened up a whole new world for us in terms of what is known about the grandparents and what happens when things
don't go great in Fort McMurray and elsewhere. And, you know, the parents lose capacity to be able to raise their children. And so that led us to new projects with Nora and with Dawn Avery, and where we started looking at the grandparenting experience of raising your grandchildren. So that is where, you know, from where we went with the Tale of Two Islands, it's continued on into another program of research that's focusing on the grandparenting impact particularly.
Thanks, Christina. Sharon, how about you? How has this experience impacted your life and your work?
Thank you. I'm going to just start with how the field research impacted me, because after the field research for this chapter, before it was written, I was working on with Leslie Butler on digital stories for On the Move, and we met a group of CN pensioners here in St. John's who were a major help for us for another film, for another digital story, in providing access to key archival materials that they held. The professional archivists and all the formal archives here told us, go see the CN pensioners when we were trying to find archives about CN. So that meeting led to the film, The Last Generation, which focuses on the historical family making among CN workers in this province, and also currently among CN pensioners. So this film is mentioned in the chapter because it was completed as the writing of this chapter was coming to a close, and it's so relevant to the earlier field work. So The Last Generation gives a sense of the family making that happened during employees' lives with CN, but also how it continued. And it highlights, I think, the importance of looking at family making that happens in pensioners associations and volunteer groups and so on. But it also reminds us of the rupture to work families that's created when people lose their jobs, as Stephen was referencing. And this occurred in our province when the railway lines were pulled up. And I think it's also relevant to the increasing amount of precarious work that we see today that creates hindrances to family making and employment. And I think it's something, I've noticed that more and more as I've taught students about precarious work and learned more about it. So I've been thinking also much more about transportation equity, specifically in the context of my research on the Bell Island Ferry Service, but also in relation to rural transportation more generally. So in the context of a climate crisis and public debate and policy that often profiles urban concerns, I believe that we have to pay equal attention to the transportation needs of rural families and rural workers in terms of public ways of getting around, and those that are better for the environment, such as trains, electric buses, and ferries, which you see in other countries, and also rural cycling routes. So in this chapter, we learned that keepers, like other mobile workers, are often responsible for getting to work, to and from their shifts, often in terrible weather, through private transportation or sometimes public systems, such as ferries, that are not as reliable as they should be. So there is a transportation divide in this country that's similar to the digital divide that is now being tackled more than the transportation divide. So I'm following with interest initiatives in Prince Edward Island with the Toonie transit routes, which are just fabulous, that are part of a serious plan, it seems, to expand accessibility to public transit in a province with a lot of rural as well as urban residents. I've also been working with my colleague Elizabeth Yeoman to revisit our research on the importance of improving winter sidewalk clearing in St. John's. And we've recently written a new article that elaborates and updates on our 2016 film, Honk If You Want Me Off the Road.
Shiva, last question to you. This last question in round 2. We have one more round to go. How has this impacted your work and your life today?
So, I mean, I would say this work, you know, to build upon the idea of messiness and blurriness of mobilities and the motivations for mobilities, in terms of like my lived experience, I would say that this work validated, because all the refugees that we interviewed, as it so happened, none of them actually entered Canada as asylum seekers. They had made the decision to become a refugee claimant, but they entered on valid travel permits. And this was kind of in line with the research that I'd done formally for my PhD, also partially funded by On the Move, regarding the way the people shift between these different administrative categories. Like they enter as on a temporary foreign work permit or as an international student, then they shift to become a refugee claimant, or they apply through a provincial sponsorship program, depending on, like, there is all these different, and migrants become quite strategic in determining what route to choose in terms of, facilitating their own aspirations and goals. So for myself, I mean, I'm from Iran. I'm an immigrant from Iran. I'm a first generation immigrant from Iran. I chose to come to Canada, and now I'm a Canadian citizen. But I have found myself increasingly as the years passed with the unfolding of events in Iran. At this point, whether rightly or wrongly, I do think of myself in terms of I'm not a refugee in the administrative bureaucratic sense, but in the sense that I can't return to Iran because I am afraid, and I'm afraid that my security would be endangered, and I'm also horrified. I do feel that kind of emotional sense of exile. We used to go to Iran not every year, but every other year, or every year, in fact, and to visit. And I have family. My father's there, my brother's there, my aunts are there. Some of my cousins are now in the process of seeking political asylum. They don't want to be in Iran. They don't want their children to grow up there. My other brother is a political refugee in the UK, and he's going through that incredibly onerous process. How the state and our emotional lives intersect, that's always been something that I found super fascinating. And as I observe my own life unfold, it's just like, wow, would you look at that? Now I can't return. Like, that's horrible. So in terms of future work, Dr. Catherine O'Brien and I, she's also one of Pauline's former students, now a prof of social work at Dow. We're working together on a special issue of refugee access to various goods and services in post-pandemic context. We're working with Halifax Refugee Clinic, which is also heavily featured in our chapter, as well as scholars from around the world. And we're kind of pushing that through, pushing that through the process. And it is a privilege, of course, to be part of that. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to do one last round. This is going to be short and tight and quick. I'm going to ask each of you to think about families, mobility, and work. And how would you complete the phrase, wouldn't it be great if? I want to leave the viewers and the readers with inspirational, aspirational thoughts and ideas from each of you. Sara, let's give you first crack at how would you complete the phrase, wouldn't it be great if? Thinking about families, work, and mobility.
Will do. And I first just want to thank the co-authors Griffin Kelly and Maria Mosqueda Garcia for the chance to work with them on this project. Wouldn't it be great if there were a Canada-wide commission to study how employment law and family policy do and do not take into account the impacts of and accommodation for employment-related mobilities, especially with an eye to gender, class, and racial justice and equity? And as Griffin so wisely added, this question needs to be part of any work towards a just transition in the resource and energy sectors.
That was awesome. Who'd like to go next? Daniel or Doug? That looks like your hand was up. Doug, you want to go
Wasn't,
next?
but I'll go.
We'll go Doug, and then we'll go Shiva.
Sure. My wouldn't it be great if was comes from some of the comments that our interviewees suggested that they were just looking for more support. So wouldn't it be great if there were more supports for mobile workers and their families? And what I would add in is wouldn't it be great if those supports were paid for by those industries that are profiting off the social capital of families and small communities?
Thank you. Shiva, wouldn't it be great if?
My wouldn't be great if I actually remember saying this in a conference in 2012, and I'm still repeating it. I don't guess I haven't made much progress. Just if people could just move where they wanted to, when they wanted to, without all these hurdles, state-imposed hurdles, and the way it sucks the time and resource and money and energy of families who are engaged in this complex act of evaluating and assessing and figuring out, like, if only people, like, I'm all for open borders. That's me all the way. Like, I have been since day one. So, and this research, as well as my lived experience, has kind of just solidified that belief in me. The borders are profit mongering, nation building construct by modern states, and doesn't look like we'll ever get there, but hopefully we will, where we can move towards open border.
Thank you. Kevin, how would you complete the phrase, wouldn't it be great if? Thinking about families, mobility, and work. Future forecasting.
Well, this is a great scenario because, wouldn't it be great? And the sky's the limit. We don't have to be restricted or constricted by things like borders and regulations, finances. So it gives a lot of free rein. It's hard to do. It's hard to break through those barriers that exist and try to be, so romantic in our outlook. But I like doing that, so I like this part. So wouldn't it be great if not just those very real constrictions that I just talked about were not in place, but also the internal ones, those barriers that keep us from realizing if we realize where we want to be, that we can realistically get there, whether it's our love of our work or love of our home. And, obviously with this type of subject, I think it's clear that everybody wishes that was the same thing. So that being said, sometimes it's within ourselves, certainly not always, but sometimes it's that internal struggle to say, it's like, I can do this. So I wish that for everyone.
Nice, thank you. Sharon, how about you? How would you complete the phrase, wouldn't it be great if, thinking about families, mobility, and work?
Thanks, Nora. I'm taking my cue from Transport Action Atlantic, a group I belong to, and the umbrella group Transport Action Canada. So in the context of families, mobility, and work, wouldn't it be great if governments and civil society recognize the importance of providing both rural and urban residents with accessible, affordable, convenient, environmentally defensible, safe, and sustainable public transit, be it by sea, by rail, by road, or by other modes. And one should add active transportation routes that allow for safe travel via cycling, wheeling, or walking.
Thank you. What a wonderful, just the images that wouldn't it be great if conjures up is just amazing. Mandy, wouldn't it be great if?
I think wouldn't it be great if the work involved to get to, around, for, and from work was valued as much as the work itself? Because often I get people are jealous of my flexible work schedule, but you don't think that the meeting they just arrived to and are not prepared for, I've been preparing for days. And if I had to go to every meeting, not only would I be inconvenienced, but so would they, because they'd have to wait for the go-go's. Just think about, wouldn't it be great if traveling to work was as valued as the work you do?
Thank you, Mandy. Stephen, back to you. Wouldn't it be great if?
I was glad I was last on this one. Wouldn't it be great if we learn from the failures of past economic transitions? I think we're living with the political consequences of forced displacement on a massive scale, Trump, Brexit, the rise of right-wing populism. And I think, wouldn't it be great if we were able to stretch to listen to those unlike ourselves? I think often in research, especially qualitative research, we focus on those that we admire, that we like. It's harder to actually listen to those who we politically disagree with. Yet I think this is essential, essential going forward.
Thank you. Thank you to this extraordinary panel. Thank you for your contributions to the book. Thank you for sharing your stories and how it's impacted your life today. And thank you for your aspirational, inspirational, wouldn't it be great if statements. I hope this is being recorded because those are worth hanging on to. Did you have something, Sara, that you want to add, or you're just clapping? Thumbs up. All right. I'm going to pass this over to Christina to wrap it up. But just before I do, I want to just one more word of gratitude to Barb for providing leadership in this process. This book would not have happened without her extraordinary input. When I started this project with Barb way back a decade ago, I was actually a mobile worker. I was traveling between Toronto and Ottawa, as well as spending at least 2 to 3 times a week in an airplane traveling, doing national work, both of which were a gift and an opportunity that I am so grateful for. And the ability to work with Barb and her team and our co-conspirator, collaborator, co-editor, Christina, whose energy has just been a delight to have around the table. It has been an honor and a pleasure. And wouldn't it be great if Families, Mobility and Work was on the desk of every single member of parliament, every single workplace, on every syllabus related to human resources, sociology, poli-sci, and just about every other work-related, family-related course that there might be out there. Thank you so very much. And I'm going to pass it over to Christina to wrap us up and take us home. Christina, over to you.
Thank you. So thank you all. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you. Thank you to that phone. But thank you all. As we've talked tonight, we've shared the years that we spent together working on this project. I think about what Kevin said about how life connections really do bring people together. And the idea of this sparked for us when we came together at UPEI back in 2018. Many of the contributors who were in the book, we came together, there was 83 of us. And Barb and Nora and I had wouldn't it be great to write a grant, get some funding, pull people together, and have the first Canadian symposium on families, work, and mobility. And we did that. And we did that in May at UPEI, and we brought people from around the country and the world to UPEI. And we were so intentional of how we designed the program. The program was every panel. We needed to have the voice of lived experience of those who are traveling for work, with those who are influencing policy, those who are in practice directly with mobile families, and researchers who are trying to make a difference to advance the study and the understanding of it. And from that weekend and that time together at the symposium, it sparked the next idea. Wouldn't it be great if we wrote a book? And we pulled these contributors, we pulled more together, and it became this passion, labor of love project. And my deepest thanks to Barbara Neis, who was our captain of this project. She was the captain of the book. She was, you know, Nora and I were along for the ride as the co-editors, but her guidance, mentorship, her leadership has been invaluable to the On the Move team and for what we did with this collection. It's something we are incredibly proud of, and we know that it could not have happened without all of our contributors. And then when we funnel that down even more, the work that you have done in terms of your research, your lived experiences, of being able to share that with us in the collection. So my wouldn't it be great if moment is if families were really put at the center and considered in all policies and practice decisions related to work and mobility. And with that, I'm going to give it back to Kevin Ryan for our second song of the evening.
Thank you, Christina, and everybody. Thank you, Nora and Barb, and all the contributors. I want to thank Darcy Andrews as well, who's been putting this together technically. I appreciate that. So, as I said, my chapter was sandwiched between two songs, and I gave you maybe the little more cheerful one earlier. But this one is kind of what I brought to that original symposium. It's called The Forgotten Islander, and I wrote it as a younger version of myself when I was first considering leaving Prince Edward Island to see something different, if not better. Yeah, so congratulations, everybody. This is called The Forgotten Islander. Every once in a while, at the end of a working day, I drive down to Wood Islands, watch the ferry as it pulls away. And every time I see a Mustang with island plates, I stare at the ocean, wishing I was in their place. Well, I'm sick and tired of being the center of my own attention. And as for ties that bind, there's none strong enough to mention. So I think I'll just head it on home and pack it all up. Looks like moving on is the only way that I'll move up. And if you care, you can call me the Forgotten Islander. A bunch of dreams surrounded by the sea. While I know I'll never forget the island, sometimes it feels like the island's forgotten me. Now it's easier to sing this song than it is to live it. 'Cause talk is cheap when there's only wild notions in it. And while I know it's the scariest thing that I've ever done, I'd rather be a brand new child than a forgotten son. If you care, you can call